When you think about it, aggression seems to be everywhere. It's part of playground squabbles, sure, but also shapes global conflicts. It's this constant thread through human history.
It really is. It impacts us individually, and it definitely shapes whole societies.
So today, we wanted to do a deep dive into exactly that. What's behind it? How does it work? And maybe what can we learn about changing its course based on the sources we've looked at?
Yeah, and we've pulled together a lot of different angles for this. We're talking evolutionary biology, anthropology, psychology, sociology, even looking at some cutting-edge AI stuff.
The goal really is to pull out the key insights for you. Why does aggression exist? How do we see it play out? And are there ways to, well, manage it better? All distilled down.
Exactly. Clear, concise, but thorough.
Okay, so first things first. Let's get clear on what we actually mean by aggression. It seems obvious, but the definition is quite specific, isn't it?
It is, yeah. Our sources define human aggression as basically any intentional behavior where the goal is to cause harm, physical or psychological, to someone else who actively wants to avoid that harm.
Intentional is the key word there. So
Yeah.
accidentally bumping into someone isn't aggression.
Right, or even like rough play between kids where no one actually intends to hurt the other person.
Yeah.
And it's also useful to separate aggression from violence.
How so?
Well, violence is really seen as an extreme form of aggression. The main aim there is usually severe physical injury or even death.
Got it. So maybe yelling at someone is aggressive, but hitting them crosses into violence.
Yeah.
And then there's assertiveness. That's different again.
Completely different. Assertiveness is just standing up for yourself, for your rights or needs, but doing it respectfully. There's no intention to harm or dominate the other person. It's self-advocacy, not attack.
Okay. And aggression itself isn't just one thing either.
No, not at all. You've got direct aggression, things like yelling, insulting, pushing, hitting, pretty obvious stuff. But then there's indirect aggression. This is more social manipulation, spreading rumors, excluding someone from a group, cyberbullying, ways to harm someone socially or emotionally without a face-to-face fight.
That indirect kind can be really damaging, sometimes even more so because it's harder to pin down.
Definitely. And this isn't, just something men do or something new. Our sources really hammer home that aggression is found across genders, ages, cultures, and throughout history.
It's universal.
Pretty much, yeah. Which strongly suggests it's, well, a fundamental part of how humans interact and probably shaped our history in major ways.
Okay, that persistence is fascinating. Let's dig into the why then. Where does this come from? What do evolution and anthropology tell us?
From an evolutionary psychology standpoint, the idea is that aggression isn't just like a malfunction. It's seen as a set of tools or mechanisms that evolved because they helped our ancestors solve real problems back in the day.
Problems like what? Survival stuff.
Exactly. Think about competing for scarce resources, food, water, safe territory, defending yourself, your family, your group from threats, establishing your place in the social pecking order.
Okay.
Even attracting mates, or making sure your kids survived. In certain situations, being able to act aggressively could have given individuals a serious edge in surviving and, crucially, passing on their genes.
So it was adaptive in a way, a harsh reality of that ancestral environment. What about the emotion behind it, like anger? Did that fit in?
Yeah, the thinking is that emotions like anger also evolved as motivators. Just like feeling love might motivate you to protect your child, feeling anger could motivate you to fight for resources or defend against an attack. They push us towards actions that, historically, might have boosted survival or reproduction.
It's like a built-in alarm and response system.
Sort of, yeah. And social evolution theory kind of echoes this, suggesting aggression evolves mostly for reasons that benefit the individual, doing it what you might call selfish or even spiteful reasons in terms of outcomes.
Okay, let's look at the physical evidence. What have anthropologists found from studying early humans or even our primate cousins?
Well, we have direct evidence from fossil skeletons showing signs of violence, like embedded weapon tips. That tells us conflict isn't new.
All right.
And when we look at hunter-gatherer societies and compare them to chimpanzees, we see some striking similarities in how groups interact, particularly with other groups.
Right.
Intergroup aggression, often over territory or resources.
So attacking outsiders might have really deep roots, that us versus them thing.
It certainly looks that way, suggesting proactive aggression towards outgroups goes way back in our lineage, shared with our closest relatives. It's a bit unsettling, really.
It is, but then language comes along. How did that change the game for aggression in early human societies?
Language is fascinating here. The idea is that once language developed, probably in the late Pleistocene, it allowed for much more complex, planned, and coordinated aggression, especially within the group.
How so? Like planning raids?
Well, yes, possibly planning conflict between groups, but also managing things inside the group. Think about gossip, how it can damage someone's reputation and social standing.
Yeah, social death almost.
Exactly. Or consciously deciding to ostracize someone who breaks the rules, or even group decisions about capital punishment. These are sophisticated forms of social control.
So language could be used to enforce group norms, maybe even the egalitarian values we often see in hunter-gatherer groups.
Precisely. It could potentially reduce the need for immediate, reactive physical fights within the group by providing other ways to deal with transgressions. Language became a powerful social tool for cooperation, yes, but also for coercion and control.
A double-edged sword, then. What about large-scale violence, like actual warfare or slavery? When did that stuff emerge? Is it ancient or more recent?
That's actually a big debate. Some researchers argue that really systemic endemic warfare and things like enslavement came much later, maybe tied to the rise of agriculture, denser populations, and stored resources around 8500 BCE.
Because there was more to fight over, perhaps.
Possibly, yeah. And more complex social structures. But others point to archaeological sites showing evidence of large-scale collective violence much earlier, like Jebel Sahaba in Sudan or Naturuk in Kenya, dating back tens of thousands of years.
So the jury's still out on the exact timeline for big wars.
The timing and scale are debated, but what seems pretty likely is that language was a key ingredient. The ability to plan, coordinate, and communicate complex intentions definitely paved the way for more organized forms of aggression, whether it was small-scale raids or eventually larger conflicts.
Okay, so we have these deep evolutionary and anthropological roots. Let's shift focus a bit to the individual level now. What about our biology, genes, brain chemistry, hormones? How do they play into aggression?
They definitely play a significant role. Our sources point to heritability studies suggesting that genetics account for maybe 40 to 50% of the individual differences we see in aggressive tendencies.
So it's partly inherited. Are there specific genes involved?
One that gets a lot of attention is the MAOA gene monoamine oxidase A. There's a specific variant, often called the low-activity variant, that's been linked to higher levels of aggression.
Just having the gene makes you aggressive.
That's the crucial part. It's not that simple. The link is much stronger, especially in males, when that genetic variant is combined with negative childhood experiences like maltreatment or abuse.
The gene-environment interaction. Nature and nurture.
Exactly. It really highlights how our biology and our life experiences weave together. Other genes involved in dopamine regulation, like DATE1 and DRD2, have also been linked to aggression. Dopamine is tied to the brain's reward system, so that suggests motivation and reinforcement might be involved.
Interesting. What about that old idea about the XYY chromosome thing making men super aggressive? Is there anything to that?
Not really, no. That's largely been debunked by better research. It was a popular idea for a while, but the evidence just doesn't consistently support a strong link between the XYY genotype and aggression.
Good to know.
And it's also interesting that different types of aggression, like the impulsive reactive kind versus the planned proactive kind, might be influenced differently by genetic and environmental factors. They might have distinct biological pathways.
Okay, let's talk about those pathways. What's happening in the brain when someone becomes aggressive?
Key areas are involved. The amygdala, deep in the brain's limbic system, is critical. It processes emotions like fear and anger, and it's constantly scanning for threats. It can trigger a very fast defensive response.
The fight or flight center.
Pretty much, yeah. If the amygdala is, say, overly sensitive or reactive, and it's not properly regulated by other brain areas, it can increase the chances of an aggressive outburst.
And what regulates it?
That's where the prefrontal cortex comes in. It's the front part of the brain, responsible for executive functions planning, decision-making, impulse control, regulating emotions. It's like the brain's CEO or brake pedal. Studies have found that individuals with histories of violence sometimes show reduced activity or even structural differences in their prefrontal cortex. This suggests they might have more difficulty inhibiting those aggressive impulses coming from deeper brain regions.
So maybe an overactive alarm system in the amygdala and underactive brakes in the prefrontal cortex.
That's a good way to put it, yeah. And research suggests different neural circuits might be more involved depending on the type of aggression. Reactive, hot aggression seems to involve a pathway including the amygdala, hypothalamus, and periaqueductal gray areas involved in threat response and basic drives.
And the cold, planned aggression.
That seems to rely more on higher cortical areas, the parts involved in planning and goal-directed behavior. Interestingly, though, an area called the striatum, which is central to the brain's reward system, has been found to be enlarged in relation to both types of aggression.
Reward system again. So aggression, whether it's impulsive or planned, might somehow tap into pathways that make it feel rewarding.
That's a possibility researchers are exploring. It could be reinforcing the behavior, making it more likely to happen again. It's quite complex.
Definitely. And we can't forget hormones. Testosterone always comes up in discussions about aggression.
It does, and there is a link, but it's not straightforward in humans. Testosterone levels can influence aggression, but social factors, context, and individual differences play a huge role in moderating that effect. It's not just more testosterone equals more aggression.
Okay. What about other hormones or neurochemicals?
Serotonin is a big one. It generally acts as an inhibitor. It helps put the brakes on impulsive behavior. Lower levels of serotonin have been consistently linked with increased impulsivity and often higher rates of aggression and violence.
So low serotonin might make it harder to control those impulses.
That seems to be the case. And then there are other players too. Hormones and neuropeptides like vasopressin, oxytocin, cortisol, even estradiol. They all seem to modulate aggression in various complex ways. It's an intricate chemical dance.
Wow, okay. So biology lays a foundation, maybe creates predispositions, but it sounds like our social world, our culture, really shapes how this all plays out.
Absolutely crucial. Biology isn't destiny here. Social learning theory, for instance, is really important. It basically says we learn aggressive behaviors by watching and imitating others.
Especially when we're young.
Yes, childhood and adolescence are key periods. The family environment is huge. If kids see aggression modeled by parents, or if their own aggression isn't met with consistent consequences, they're much more likely to learn that pattern.
And friends, peer groups.
Big influence there, too. Peers can teach specific ways to be aggressive, and sometimes dominance hierarchies get set up within groups based on who is more aggressive or intimidating.
And what about the media? We hear so much about violent video games, movies. Does that exposure actually make people more aggressive?
The research is debated, but our sources suggest exposure to media violence can contribute. It might teach specific aggressive scripts, or maybe more worryingly, lead to desensitization.
Meaning you get used to it, doesn't shock you as much.
Exactly. Repeated exposure can lessen the emotional impact of seeing violence or suffering, potentially making aggressive acts seem less severe or more acceptable. Some even talk about it like a contagion. Seeing violence can normalize it.
That's quite a thought. Thinking about groups. How do social hierarchies and our desire for status connect to aggression?
Well, you often see dominance hierarchies in social groups, where status comes from power, control, maybe even coercion. These kinds of setups tend to breed more aggression as individuals jostle for position.
Trying to climb the ladder by pushing others down.
Essentially, yes. But then you also have prestige hierarchies, where status is based on respect earned through skills, knowledge, or helping the group. Those tend to be linked with less aggression.
So different ways to gain status.
Right. Aggression can become a tool to negotiate status, especially in dominant systems, helping people get access to resources or mates. But groups also have ways of pushing back, sometimes called anti-dominance instincts, against individuals who get too aggressive or power-hungry.
Trying to keep bullies in check.
Kind of, yeah. Although paradoxically, sometimes in certain contexts, like some school environments, kids who are aggressive can actually become quite popular if that aggression is seen as demonstrating power or fitting in with certain group norms.
That's worrying, shifting to a bigger scale.
Yeah.
What about major historical events? Wars, revolutions. How do they impact aggression levels in the society?
Profoundly. Experiencing war violence directly can lead to long-term psychological issues, including increased aggression and PTSD. Even just widespread exposure to violence, directly or indirectly, can desensitize a population over time.
Making violence seem more normal.
Yes. And these large-scale conflicts obviously cause immense trauma, anxiety, social disruption, economic hardship, all factors that can contribute to instability and potentially more violence down the line. History is, sadly, full of examples, from ancient conflicts to modern political violence, with the forms changing based on technology and society, but the underlying aggression often recurring.
And it's not just on battlefields, is it? Aggression happens within families, relationships.
Oh, absolutely. Relationship violence, physical, sexual, emotional, financial, even digital control, is often about one person trying to exert power over another. And aggression can be instrumental, used as a tool to get something specific.
Like money or compliance.
Right. Or it can be hostile, driven purely by anger or the desire to inflict pain. Then there's relational aggression, aiming to damage social bonds, and even self-directed aggression.
And psychological aggression. You mentioned that earlier. The non-physical stuff.
Yes, the verbal attacks, the manipulation, the behaviors designed to undermine someone's confidence and self-worth. Our sources emphasize this can be just as harmful psychologically as physical violence, with really long-lasting scars. And thinking about groups again, collective aggression from early human hunting parties to modern warfare has clearly played a huge, if morally complex, role throughout our history.
Let's touch on something often linked to social tension. Economic inequality. Is there a connection to aggression there?
There seems to be, yes. Research consistently finds correlations as foreign societies with higher levels of income inequality tend to also have higher rates of crime, both property crime and violent crime.
Why might it be?
One major theory is relative deprivation. It's not just about being poor, it's about feeling poor compared to others you see around you. That feeling of unfairness, of being left behind, can breed resentment, frustration, and potentially aggression.
So inequality creates conditions where violence might be more likely.
It seems to foster those conditions, yes, and often the most vulnerable people in unequal societies bear the brunt of that violence, which can create vicious cycles. It's also a really disturbing historical observation that sometimes periods where inequality decreased significantly were actually accompanied by more violence, at least temporarily. The relationship is clearly very complex.
That is deeply unsettling. What about social movements? We often see them as aiming for positive change, but sometimes they involve aggression too, don't they?
They can, yes. While many are peaceful, some movements might use aggressive rhetoric or actions. This can be strategic, aimed at achieving a specific outcome. It can be symbolic, meant to send a powerful message. Or it can be reactive, a response to perceived oppression or violence from authorities.
And then there's broader collective violence.
Right, things like riots, gang violence, coups, rebellions, terrorism, war. These often emerge from periods of social unrest, where groups feel threatened, marginalized, or are trying to assert their identity or gain control. Aggression becomes a tool for the group.
Okay, we've covered a lot of ground: evolution, biology, social factors. Let's turn to something really powerful: our beliefs. How do things like religion, politics, and cultural norms fuel or maybe even curb aggression?
Belief systems are incredibly powerful motivators. Take religion. Throughout history, religious beliefs have been used to justify horrific violence, wars, persecution.
The Crusades, for example.
Exactly, but religion has also been a major force for peace, compassion, and condemning violence. So it's complex. There's a debate about whether religion itself is the primary driver of conflict, or if it's often used as a cover or justification for more worldly motives like power or resources.
So it can be manipulated.
Certainly. Extremist interpretations, political exploitation of religious feeling, these can definitely lead to violence. But it's crucial to remember the flip side. Religious teachings often promote empathy, forgiveness, and reducing bias. It's just that, unfortunately, religiously motivated violence and inequality are still major global problems.
And political ideologies, they seem central to so much conflict today.
Absolutely. Political ideologies provide a lens to understand the world, identify grievances, point fingers at who's supposedly responsible, and crucially, justify actions including violence to achieve political goals.
Creating an us versus them dynamic.
Very much so. They foster strong group identities, often demonize opponents, and can make aggression seem not only acceptable but necessary or even heroic. Different ideologies have different aims. Some want to preserve the status quo. Others want radical change. Some focus on national dominance. Others on self-determination. Some ideologies, frankly, seem to value violence itself.
Are certain ideologies more prone to justifying violence?
Some research links traits like right-wing authoritarianism with a greater tendency to endorse political violence under certain conditions. But really, political ideology in general strongly shapes how people judge the morality of violence. What one group sees as terrorism, another might see as freedom fighting.
And are we seeing shifts in attitudes towards political violence?
There are concerning trends, yeah. In the U.S., for example, some studies show growing acceptance of political violence among certain segments, often fueled by intense dislike of the other side, belief in conspiracy theories, and feeling like their way of life is under threat.
It's like beliefs create the justification. What about less formal beliefs? Cultural norms, social attitudes about aggression.
Hugely important. Sometimes this is called cultural violence. The ingrained norms and attitudes within a society that make direct or structural violence seem normal, acceptable, maybe even invisible. These norms get passed down generationally.
Like attitudes about gender.
That's a key example. Traditional masculine norms that emphasize toughness, dominance, and suppressing vulnerability can be linked to higher rates of aggression in men. Conversely, societal norms might shape how aggression is expressed by women, perhaps steering it towards more indirect forms sometimes.
So culture sets the rules for how aggression is displayed or controlled.
In many ways, yes. Our general beliefs about aggression, whether we think it's effective, whether it's acceptable, are shaped by our community, our upbringing, the media we consume. These beliefs then influence how likely we are to be aggressive ourselves. Especially for adolescents, beliefs about whether aggression is okay or normal are a really strong predictor of their behavior. Social perspectives really stress that aggression isn't just an individual impulse, it's saturated with social meaning and context.
This is incredibly complex. Think about the individual again.
Yeah.
What's the psychological fallout? For victims, but also for perpetrators.
The impact on victims can be devastating and long-lasting. We're talking trauma, persistent fear, anxiety, depression, PTSD, can shatter their sense of safety, damage relationships, erode self-esteem.
And that's not just from physical violence, right? The psychological stuff matters too.
Yeah. Absolutely. Our sources emphasize that psychological aggression, the constant criticism, humiliation, control can be just as damaging, sometimes more insidiously, than physical attacks. And interestingly, being socially rejected or excluded is also linked to an increase in aggressive behavior later on. It's a painful cycle.
Does it affect physical health too?
Yes, the chronic stress, the intense anger, the emotional turmoil that often accompany experiencing or even witnessing aggression can take a toll on the body. There are known links between chronic anger and hostility and things like cardiovascular problems.
Wow. What about the person doing the aggressing? What's the psychological impact on them?
It's not always straightforward, but perpetrators aren't necessarily immune to negative consequences. They might experience depression, feelings of hopelessness, guilt, or shame, especially if their actions violate their own moral standards.
Or maybe aggression becomes a habit, a coping mechanism.
That can happen too, yes. For some, especially with psychological aggression, it might become a maladaptive way to cope with their own insecurities or frustrations. And if the aggression brings a temporary feeling of power or control, that feeling can reinforce the behavior, making it harder to stop.
We talk about anger, but are other emotions tied up with aggression?
Definitely. Anger is the classic trigger, but fear is often involved too, especially in reactive aggression, lashing out because you feel threatened.
Okay.
And perhaps surprisingly, aggression can sometimes be linked with emotions we might think of as positive, at least in certain contexts, like the grim satisfaction of revenge, or the excitement or sense of camaraderie that can come with group aggression or combat.
That's a strange mix of feelings.
It is. And conversely, some studies suggest that experiencing positive emotional cues might actually help reduce aggression in some situations. It's complex. Personality also plays a big role, of course. Individual differences matter a lot. Some people are just more prone to perceiving threats in ambiguous situations. Others might hold strong beliefs that aggression is an effective way to solve problems or get what they want.
What about self-esteem? Is low self-esteem linked to aggression?
It's actually a bit more nuanced than that.
Well,
Some research suggests it's more about inflated or unstable self-esteem. People with a high but fragile sense of self might react very aggressively when that self-image is challenged or criticized.
like a defense mechanism.
Possibly, yeah. And broader personality models like the Big Five or Exico consistently find links between certain traits and aggression. Low agreeableness, low conscientiousness, low honesty, humility, and high neuroticism are often associated with higher levels of aggressive behavior.
Okay, this gives us a really rich, multi-layered understanding. Which brings us to the big question. What can actually be done? How can we mitigate or manage aggression?
Well, the good news is there are approaches. Educational programs are one avenue. Aggression replacement training, or ART, is a well-known one. It focuses on teaching social skills, anger control techniques, and developing moral reasoning.
So practical skills.
Yes, and there are others like SCARE or SPARE, tailored for different groups. Even in schools, general strategies like clear rules and consequences, reducing excessive competition, using nonverbal cues effectively, and focusing on positive reinforcement for good behavior can make a difference.
What about individuals really struggling with anger? psychological techniques.
Absolutely. Therapy often involves helping people identify their specific triggers, what sets them off, then teaching relaxation techniques to calm down in the heat of the moment. Cognitive restructuring is key to challenging those angry thoughts and beliefs.
Changing how you think about the situation.
Exactly. Plus, improving communication skills so you can express frustration without resorting to aggression, and building better problem-solving skills to deal with the underlying issues. Conflict resolution training is also vital. Learning how to listen, empathize, brainstorm solutions, negotiate, and de-escalate tense situations.
Those sound like valuable life skills for anyone, really.
Yeah.
Now, you mentioned AI earlier. How might artificial intelligence fit into managing aggression? It sounds a bit sci-fi.
It does, but it's happening. One area is automated detection using AI to analyze video feeds or audio streams, say in public places, to try and spot violence or escalating aggression automatically.
Like an early warning system.
Potentially, yes. Machine learning is also being used to analyze huge amounts of data to identify risk factors, maybe predicting which psychiatric patients might be at higher risk of violence, or identifying early signs in children with autism spectrum disorder who struggle with aggression.
And beyond detection, can it help mitigate?
The potential is there. Think about AI monitoring online platforms for hate speech or threats. Maybe AI tools that could assist in mediating online disputes, or even AI-driven simulations for practicing conflict resolution skills in a safe environment.
Okay, that sounds powerful, but also maybe a little concerning. What are the ethical red flags here?
Oh, absolutely. There are significant ethical considerations. Big one is bias in the algorithms. If the AI is trained on biased data, it could end up discriminating against certain groups.
Profiling, essentially.
That's the risk. Then there are huge privacy and surveillance concerns, especially with widespread monitoring. Lack of transparency is another issue. How do these AI systems actually make their decisions? Who is accountable when they get it wrong?
And what about individual freedom? Could this be used to suppress dissent or control people?
These are exactly the critical questions. We need robust human oversight, rigorous testing for bias, transparency in how the AI works, and clear ethical guidelines for deployment. It's crucial that these powerful tools are used responsibly.
So, wrapping this all up, this deep dive really underscores just how complex human aggression is. It's not one thing. It has these deep evolutionary and biological roots, but it's profoundly shaped by our society, our culture, our beliefs, our individual psychology.
And even technology now, with AI entering the picture, it's this intricate web of influences.
Exactly. And while the consequences can be incredibly destructive, it's also clear that people are working on ways to understand it better and find strategies through education, psychology, maybe even technology to mitigate the harm.
Yeah, the efforts are ongoing. And as we said, navigating the ethics, especially around AI, is going to be absolutely vital as we move forward. Responsible innovation is key.
So a final thought for you, our listener, to mull over. We've talked about all these interconnected factors: biology, society, learning, beliefs, technology. As you think about aggression, which of these threads feels most compelling to you? Where do you see the most potential, or perhaps the biggest challenges, for making a positive difference, whether it's within ourselves or in the wider world? Something to chew on. We hope this deep dive has given you some valuable food for thought.
This is DigitView.